Hello, students. I wanted to take a couple of minutes and explain this. Why do salaries deviate from the mean exercise? I've had a couple students ask me some questions about it, and it occurred to me that my explanation might not have been as explicit as it could have been. So I'm going to take a moment and dig in a little more deeply to the purpose of the exercise and to give you some background information. So on the on the high level, the purpose of the exercise is to open up that attached spreadsheet to identify two jobs for the city of San Francisco that have very similar salaries, but whose standard deviations are significantly different. So that's the high level goal. So why are we doing this? Let's take a step back. Why are we doing this whole thing? So the purpose of the exercise is to sort of on the first level is to ask you to understand the notion of standard deviation. So let's say you have two scenarios here. Scenario number one, 5 people. Scenario number two, 5 people. Scenario number one, every single one of those 2 people actually has $2 in their pocket. Scenario number two, one of the persons in that group of 5 has $10 in their pocket and the other 4 have nothing. If you average out how much money you have in both of these scenarios, on the one hand, $2 average. On the second hand, $2 average. However, those $2 averages are very different. In the first case, it's a equitable, legitimate, straight up, true representation of how much money the people have. It is $2 each, averages 2. There is no standard deviation there whatsoever. In the second example, oh my God, the standard deviation is really high because one person has $10, 4 people have nothing. So unless you have the standard deviation, you can't trust an average. You don't know anything about that average. It's just a dumb number. But standard deviation helps you understand whether or not that average is representative of the underlying population of data. So that's the first and primary goal of the activity. Secondly, it's to get you more comfortable doing searching and filtering. There's a lot of data in this spreadsheet that's attached to this assignment. There's like 44,000 city employees, and they're broken down into thousands of different jobs. And so searching for data requires that you sort data, and identifying little pieces or chunks of data like the job, like all employees that have a particular job, involves filtering the data. So this exercise is also about searching for data and filtering data. Next, the exercise is about finding patterns in data. So once you find a job and you take a look at all the employees that have that job, inspecting the individual salaries and noting the differences between the salaries would perhaps help you identify some patterns in the data, things that you see that are common. And additionally, and lastly, the exercise is about offering up plausible explanations. And what I mean by a plausible explanation is, let's say I asked you to explain why these 5 people have $2 in their pocket in scenario number one from the example I gave you earlier, and why these other 5 people don't have $5 in their pocket. I'm sorry, don't have $2 in their pocket. So in the first example, the average was $2. In the second example, the average was $2. Well, could you explain that? What could potentially be the difference? Now, I understand that when you see that scenario, you may be inclined to say, well, I have no freaking idea why those people have $2 in their pocket. I don't know those 5 people. I don't know why they have $2 in their pocket. And I definitely don't know these other 5 magical people, these imaginary people that you've come up with, Mr. Marilich. Why do they not have $2 in their pocket? I have no idea. There could potentially be some explanation for it. And so I'm asking you to offer up an explanation. And let's say that these 5 people are students. You know, for example, that these are city workers here. These people in this example, in this homework assignment, are city workers for various departments, and the departments are all different. Like some are fire departments, some are police departments, and so forth. Well, in this example, if let's say I had 5 students with $2 in their pocket, and then I had 5 students, one of which had $10 and 4 of which had nothing. Well, I don't know. Maybe one plausible explanation could be that when I grabbed those sample of people in the second case, 4 of them were in swim class and one of them was walking around campus. Well, the 4 people in swim class didn't have pockets, so they couldn't have $2 in their pocket, and this other person happened to have $10. Now, I know I'm being a little jokey with that explanation, but it is possible to offer reasonable explanations for things. And I'm curious to see what your explanations are. I'm curious to see which of you throw your arms up and say, I have no idea, and don't even offer an explanation. I'm curious which ones of you will actually offer an explanation to me. You'll find this to be the case generally when you work for companies, that when somebody throws some data at you and they ask you to explain it, you can do a couple different things. You can say, look, I don't know anything about this data. I'm not even going to try to offer an explanation for it. Or you could look at that data and you could say, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. I'll try to explain the circumstances of that data. In general, the latter group are favored when working in companies. You want employees that, when presented with some kind of a conundrum, some kind of a unknown situation, are going to offer up some kind of a plausible explanation, because often you're dealing with uncertainty, and your ability to explain that uncertainty gives you some control over it. In a sense, it gives you some framework for taking control of what would otherwise be inexplicable. So the idea here is that you're going to try to explain why the standard deviations are substantially different when the averages are the same. So let's take a quick look at the spreadsheet, and I'll go into this a little bit more detail. Here's the spreadsheet that's attached to the homework assignment, and there's some tabs at the bottom. The data source one, don't worry about that one. That just tells you where I went and got the data from, just so you would know it's legit data. This is not made up data. This is 2019 actual salaries of all the city employees in the city of San Francisco, and there's a lot of them. Then, so that all that salary data is on the first page, the compensation page. The last page, the all salary averages, I actually took the time and figured out what the average salary was for every single city worker in San Francisco. So there they are, all of them, from account clerk all the way down to workers' compensation adjuster. And by the way, if you see value, I think I'm not quite sure what value means here, but I think what that means is there was a problem calculating the data. So there could be a bad piece of data somewhere in those 27 workers, those worker compensation adjuster records on the compensation page. I don't know what that means. Basically, skip the ones that say value. Don't consider those job classifications when you're taking a look at the average salaries and the standard deviations. So the idea here of this assignment is you're going to use this page first. Go to this page first. Find two average salaries that are very similar. So I think you know how to do that. I mean, you could take a look at that one, 51,000, and then you could just start randomly searching in that list of 1,047 jobs to find another average salary, which was close to 51,000. Or maybe you could use a more efficient way of finding another salary that's close to $51,000. I wonder what that efficient way would be. So after you have located two average salaries that are really close, identify whether or not their standard deviations are significantly different. And I'll rely upon you to identify what significantly different means. But for example, that would look pretty significantly different to me. $49 versus 18,133. However, these average salaries are significantly different here. So, for example, don't use account clerk and accountant one as your two jobs that have similar averages but different standard deviations. You're going to want some kind of a salary that's very similar to that of an account clerk, another salary which is very similar to $51,000. So once you have found these two jobs that have very similar average salaries but that have different standard deviations, take each of those jobs and go research them on the compensation page. In other words, go find all the account clerks and take a look at their individual salaries for all the, in this case, 53 workers. And when you find that other job that has a similar salary to $51,042, let's say it was $50,000, that would be considered very similar. Go take a look at those employees. I don't know what that job would be that was similar to $51,000. Let's say it was a janitor. And let's go take a look at the janitor and see what their individual salaries are. And come up with some explanation for why the standard deviation is so different when the average is almost exactly the same. And that's it. That's the basis. That's the foundation, or that's the reasons why I'm asking you to do the assignment. And that is an explanation for what I would like you to do, the actual mechanics of what I'd like you to do. So I hope that was helpful. And if you have any additional questions, just send me an email. Thanks.